The reported strike on the USS Abraham Lincoln represents the exact catastrophic failure of strategic vision that many of us have been warning about for over a decade. What we are witnessing is not an isolated incident or a sudden miscalculation by Tehran, but the inevitable culmination of a fundamentally flawed American foreign policy that relies on the projection of military power through vulnerable legacy platforms in an era where the technological and tactical realities of warfare have completely fundamentally changed. For years, the Washington establishment has operated under the delusion that floating a carrier strike group into the Persian Gulf or the Eastern Mediterranean is an impenetrable shield, a supreme deterrent that bends sovereign nations to our will. That era is over. It ended the moment precision-guided anti-ship ballistic missiles and advanced hypersonic glide vehicles became a reality, and the strike on the Lincoln is the brutal, undeniable proof. When you look at the strategic picture, what happens next is entirely predictable, yet our political elites seem utterly unprepared for it. First, the immediate military response from the United States will be predictable and likely disproportionate. There will be an overwhelming political demand in Washington to launch punitive strikes deep into Iranian territory. We will see Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from submarines and destroyers targeting Iranian command and control centers, air defense nodes, and potentially their nuclear enrichment facilities. However, this reactionary escalation fails to address the operational reality on the ground and in the water. Iran is not a disorganized militia. It is a massive, heavily fortified nation-state with a sophisticated, deeply buried military infrastructure and an arsenal of thousands of precision-guided munitions. If the United States retaliates by striking the Iranian mainland, Tehran will not simply absorb the blow. They will unleash a sustained saturation bombardment of American military installations across the entire region. Bases in Iraq, Syria, Bahrain, and the UAE will be subjected to massive missile and drone barrages that our Patriot and THAAD interceptor batteries will simply not be able to intercept in their entirety. You cannot win a war of attrition against an adversary operating from its own heavily fortified landmass when you are relying on extended, vulnerable supply lines stretching thousands of miles across the ocean. Furthermore, the economic consequences will be immediate and devastating. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a massive percentage of the world's daily oil consumption flows, will be effectively closed. Commercial shipping will cease. Insurance premiums for any vessel attempting to enter the region will skyrocket to impossible levels. Oil prices will instantly surge past $150, perhaps $200 a barrel, triggering a massive shockwave through the global economy. This is happening at a time when Western economies are already deeply fragile, burdened by immense debt, and struggling with inflation. The spike in energy costs will paralyze European manufacturing, severely contract the American economy, and instantly plunge the world into a severe recession, if not a depression. And the strategic beneficiaries of this economic chaos will not be in Washington or London. China and Russia are watching this unfold with calculated patience. Beijing will not intervene directly, but it will capitalize on the complete absorption of American military and political bandwidth in the Middle East. With the United States desperately trying to stabilize a spiraling conflict in the Persian Gulf and scrambling to replace or repair crippled naval assets, the deterrent posture in the Indo-Pacific will be critically degraded. China will recognize that Washington lacks the logistical capacity, the munitions stockpiles, and the political will to fight a two-front war. This creates the optimal window for Beijing to decisively resolve the Taiwan question on its own terms, knowing the United States cannot meaningfully respond. Concurrently, Russia, which has already successfully reoriented its economy and forged a deep strategic partnership with China, will continue to consolidate its position in Eastern Europe. The complete failure of the Western proxy war strategy against Moscow has already exposed the severe limitations of NATO's industrial base. Now, with American artillery shells, interceptor missiles, and intelligence assets being rapidly redirected to the Middle East to save a collapsing deterrent posture, the Ukrainian military, already depleted and fractured, will face an accelerated collapse. The tragic reality is that the United States military is not configured for this type of conflict. We have spent 20 years fighting counterinsurgency operations against adversaries who possess no air force, no navy, and no precision-guided weapons. We have built an incredibly expensive, technologically exquisite, but inherently fragile force architecture. Aircraft carriers are magnificent instruments of power projection against technologically inferior foes, but against a peer or near-peer adversary armed with modern anti-access, area denial networks, they are massive, slow-moving targets carrying thousands of American sailors. The loss of a carrier, or even the severe crippling of one, fundamentally breaks the psychological spell of American military invincibility. It sends a message to the entire global South, to the BRICS nations, and to any non-aligned state that the unipolar moment is definitively over. Our adversaries have spent the last 2 decades studying our vulnerabilities. They understand that our logistics trains are vulnerable, that our munitions stockpiles are shallow, and that our political leadership is deeply disconnected from the brutal realities of industrial warfare. If the United States commits ground forces to the region, it will be a disaster of unprecedented proportions. A ground invasion of Iran is militarily impossible without a mobilization of millions of men, something the American public will absolutely not tolerate. Therefore, we will rely on air and naval power, dropping expensive munitions on empty bunkers, while the adversary systematically dismantles our regional base structure and bleeds our economy dry through the weaponization of global energy markets. What we are looking at is the rapid acceleration of a multipolar world order birthed through violent systemic shock. The illusion that we can control the Middle East through the sporadic application of high-end military technology has been shattered. The immediate aftermath of this strike will see a desperate scramble by Washington to assemble a coalition, but our traditional allies in the region, particularly the Gulf states, will be incredibly hesitant. They know that if they allow their territory to be used as launching pads for American strikes against Iran, their own critical infrastructure, their desalination plants, their oil refineries, their financial centers will be annihilated in hours. They will likely push for de-escalation, leaving the United States diplomatically isolated in its desire for retaliation. The sane, rational response to this catastrophic event would be a total reevaluation of our global posture. We must recognize that we are no longer the undisputed global hegemon capable of dictating terms in every theater simultaneously. We need to withdraw our vulnerable forces from the Middle East, a region that is no longer strictly vital to our core national security given our own domestic energy capabilities. We must focus on defending our own hemisphere, rebuilding our hollowed-out industrial base, and prioritizing the actual defense of the United States rather than the maintenance of an overextended, unmanageable global empire. But sadly, the establishment in Washington lacks the humility and the strategic competence to admit their profound failures. They will likely double down, pushing us closer to a global, systemic war that we are neither prepared for nor capable of winning. The strike on the Lincoln is not just a military engagement, it is the death knell of the post-Cold War world order, and the geopolitical earthquake that follows will reshape the map of global power for the next century.